The rain hammered down like a relentless accusation, turning the cracked asphalt of the roadside diner into a slick mirror of the stormy night. 8-year-old Tommy huddled under the flickering neon sign, his small frame shivering in a threadbare jacket soaked through to the skin. He'd been waiting for hours, ever since his mother had dropped him off with a hurried kiss and a promise that Daddy would be there by dusk. But dusk had bled into midnight, and the only company Tommy had was the distant rumble of thunder and the occasional splash of tires from passing cars that never slowed. His eyes, wide with a mix of hope and growing fear, scanned the empty highway, clutching a crumpled drawing of a motorcycle he'd made for his father, a symbol of the adventures they'd share one day. No one came. The world felt vast and unforgiving, leaving the boy alone with the cold seep in, whispering doubts that no child should hear. And in that moment, as the storm raged on, what if one act of kindness could rewrite a broken promise? Headlights pierced the downpour like searchlights from another world, a low growl cutting through the wind. It wasn't a single vehicle, but a convoy. Harley engines roaring in unison, their chrome accents gleaming faintly under the rain's assault. 50 bikes, maybe more, thundered along the highway, a leather-clad brotherhood cutting through the night like shadows given form. At the lead rode Ethan Harlan, a man whose face bore the etched lines of too many sunsets and sunrises on the open road. 42 years old, with salt and pepper stubble and tattoos that mapped out battles long buried. Lost comrades from a war that had stolen his youth, a marriage shattered by ghosts he couldn't outrun. Ethan had walked away from it all years ago, vowing to his old crew that he'd never look back. But promises had a way of clinging like exhaust fumes, and tonight something pulled him to slow as they passed the diner. The convoy eased to a halt, engines idling with a deep, throaty purr that drowned out the rain. Riders dismounted, their boots splashing in puddles, exchanging glances under hooded brows. Ethan killed his ignition first, the sudden silence amplifying the storm's fury. He spotted the boy immediately, curled up like a forgotten package, tears mingling with rainwater on his cheeks. Ethan's gut twisted, a flash of memory hitting him. His own son, lost to illness before he'd even learned to ride a bike. That pain had forged the iron vow, the unbreakable code of his club. Protect the vulnerable, honor the forgotten. "What's this?" he muttered to his vice, a burly veteran named Marcus, who nodded toward the kid. Tommy looked up, startled, as the giant on the bike approached. Ethan's shadow loomed, but his voice was gravel-soft, cutting through the noise. "Hey, little man, you waiting for someone?" The boy nodded, words choking out between shivers. "My dad. He was supposed to pick me up. Mom said he'd be here." Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd heard that story before, too many times on forgotten stretches of road. Absent fathers, broken homes, the kind of scars that lingered like engine knock. He knelt, ignoring the mud soaking his jeans, and pulled a bandana from his pocket to wipe the boy's face. "Name's Ethan. This here's my family. We don't leave folks out in the rain." Word spread through the crew like a spark on dry tinder. These weren't just riders, they were the Iron Promise, a brotherhood born from the ashes of war and regret, bound by oaths whispered over campfires and graves. Marcus radioed the others, and soon the convoy encircled the diner, a wall of leather and steel against the storm. One rider, a woman named Riley, with the nurse's steady hands hidden under her gloves, fetched a blanket from her saddlebag and wrapped it around Tommy. "Easy now," she said, her voice a calm anchor. "You're safe with us." The boy clung to it, the warmth chasing away the chill, but his eyes darted nervously, stories of strangers, warnings from school. Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't their usual run. They were en route to a memorial ride for a fallen brother up north, but oaths didn't bend for convenience. He remembered his own vow, made to a dying friend in the sands overseas. "Watch out for the little ones, Ethan. The world's got enough wolves." That promise had kept him riding, kept the club together when everything else fell apart. Calling the local sheriff's outpost on his cell, he got the runaround. Overworked lines, no immediate response. Tommy's mother was unreachable, her number going straight to voicemail. "We can't just leave him," Ethan said, more to himself than the crew. Marcus clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Then we don't. Club's got your back." As the rain eased to a drizzle, the diner owner emerged, wiping his hands on a rag, eyeing the bikers warily. "Kid's been here since evening. Said his pa's a trucker, but no shows turned up." Ethan nodded, slipping the man a few bills for coffee all around. The crew settled in, sharing stories to distract Tommy. Tales of epic rides across deserts, rescues in blizzards, the kind that painted them not as outlaws, but guardians. The boys' tension melted, a tentative smile breaking through as one rider sketched a motorcycle on a napkin mirroring his drawing. But dawn was breaking, painting the sky in bruised purples, and answers weren't coming. Ethan's phone buzzed, a text from an old contact, a private investigator who'd owed him a favor since the war. Preliminary check: Tommy's father had a record, vanished after a custody dispute. Signs of neglect, whispers of a life unraveling. The boy's mother, desperate, had pinned everything on this reunion. Ethan's resolve hardened. This wasn't just a stray kid. It was an echo of his own unfinished business. A chance to honor the vow that had saved him from the darkness. By first light, the decision was made. "We're taking him to the nearest safe haven," Ethan announced to the crew. Their nods unanimous. Riley would ride with Tommy in a sidecar they jury-rigged, ensuring he felt the wind without the fear. As they revved up, the convoy reformed, now with a new purpose, a promise to deliver this child to warmth and truth, no matter the miles. Tommy climbed on, clutching Ethan's jacket, the rain-scented air alive with possibility. Little did they know, this detour would unearth secrets that tested every bond, forcing Ethan to confront the shadows he'd buried. The road ahead stretched infinite, but for the first time in years, it felt like home. The engines thundered to life, carrying them into the sunrise, where loyalty would clash with betrayal, and one small boy's weight became the spark for redemption. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the endless ribbon of highway that snaked through the arid plains. The convoy moved like a living beast, engines humming a steady rhythm that vibrated through the air, kicking up faint clouds of dust from the roadside gravel. Tommy rode in the sidecar rigged to Riley's bike, his small hands gripping the edge, the blanket still draped over his shoulders like a makeshift cape. The wind whipped at his hair, carrying the sharp tang of wet earth and exhaust. But for the first time that night, the chill in his bones began to thaw. Ethan led the pack, his broad back a silhouette against the glaring light, eyes scanning the horizon as if the road itself held answers. Behind him, Marcus and the others formed a protective phalanx, their leathers creaking with each twist of the throttle. This wasn't just a ride anymore. It was a mission, born from the unspoken code that bound them tighter than blood. Riley glanced down at Tommy, her voice cutting through the roar. "You ever been on a bike before, kid?" He shook his head, eyes wide as saucers, taking in the blur of passing scrub brush and the occasional flicker of a distant farmhouse. "Feels like flying," she said, a soft smile cracking her weathered face. She'd patched up enough wounds in her days as a nurse, bullet grazes from bar fights, burns from road rash, to know the fragility of trust. Tommy nodded, clutching the crumpled drawing tighter in his fist. It was his talisman, a crayon-scrawled vision of father and son on a gleaming chopper chasing sunsets. But the man who'd promised that dream was a ghost, and the reality pressed in like the heat rising from the blacktop. Miles ticked by, the convoy weaving past sleepy towns where locals paused on porches, coffee mugs in hand, to watch the thunder of steel roll through. Ethan felt the weight of it all, the boy's quiet hope mirroring his own buried regrets. 20 years ago, in the dust-choked valleys of a forgotten conflict, he'd made a pact with his squad: look after each other's kin if the worst came. His best friend, Jake, had extracted the vow with his last breath, eyes glassy under the merciless sun. "My girl's gonna need a dad someday, Ethan. Don't let the world chew her up." Jake's daughter had been just a toddler then. Ethan had sent money when he could, but life on the road pulled him away. Now Tommy's face evoked that same fierce protectiveness, a reminder that promises didn't fade with time. They rusted, waiting to be polished by action. The first sign of trouble came at a crossroads gas station, where the pumps stood like weary sentinels under a faded awning. The crew pulled in for fuel, the air thick with the acrid bite of gasoline and the sizzle of frying oil from a nearby food truck. Tommy hopped out, legs wobbly, and Ethan knelt to his level. "We're heading to a place called Haven's Rest. Folks there know how to sort these things. Social services, but the good kind. Sound okay?" The boy bit his lip, glancing at the endless sky. "What if Dad shows up? Mom said he'd come." Ethan's throat tightened. Lies like that were the cruelest chains. "If he does, we'll make sure you know. But right now, we're your ride home." As the tanks filled, Marcus sidled up, his voice low. "Got a ping from that PI contact. Kids' folks are in deep debts, arguments that spilled over. Father's not just late. He's skipped town after some run-in with the law. Nothing violent, but enough to spook the mom into this desperate handoff." Ethan's fists clenched around his handlebars, the leather gloves creaking. Corruption wasn't new to him. Back in the service, he'd seen brass turn blind eyes to the suffering below. Here, it smelled the same, systems that chewed up the small and spit out excuses. "We get him safe first, then we dig deeper. Iron Promise doesn't walk away from this." Refueled and rolling again, the mood shifted as storm clouds gathered on the western edge, promising another downpour. Tommy pointed out hawks circling overhead, their wings slicing the blue like knives. "They look free," he said, and Riley chuckled. "That's the road for you. Freedom with a purpose." But freedom had its illusions. Ethan's mind drifted to the club's ledger of oaths, the time they'd stood vigil for a member's widow, rain lashing their backs as they blocked repo men from her door, the midnight ride to pull a stranded vet from a ditch, his demons howling louder than the wind. Each act stitched them closer, a family forged in the fire of what they'd lost. By midday, they hit the outskirts of a mid-sized town, the highway giving way to tree-lined streets and the hum of daily life. Haven's Rest loomed ahead, a modest center with whitewashed walls and a playground visible through chain-link fences. But as they approached, a squad car idled at the curb, lights flashing silently. The officer, a stern-faced man with a badge glinting like judgment, stepped out, hand resting on his belt. "What's this parade?" he barked, eyeing the convoy with the wariness of someone who'd seen too many headlines about outlaw gangs. Ethan dismounted smoothly, helmet under his arm, his presence commanding without threat. "Just delivering a kid to safety, officer. Found him alone last night." "Parents unreachable." The man scrutinized Tommy, who shrank behind Riley's leg. Papers were exchanged, nothing official yet, just Ethan's word and the PI's preliminary notes. But the cop's radio crackled with dispatch chatter. "Run it," he said, and minutes stretched like taffy. Tension rippled through the crew. Marcus's hand hovered near his pocket, not for a weapon, but for the club's charter. A worn booklet of their vows. The response came curt. Custody alerts, a mother's frantic call traced hours after the drop-off. But woven in were threads of doubt, whispers of an ex with grudges, a system slow to act on the vulnerable. The officer's face softened a fraction. "We'll take it from here. Appreciate the assist." Tommy hesitated. looking up at Ethan with eyes that pleaded for more than words. "You promise you'll check on me?" The big man crouched, voice steady as an engine idle. "Ironclad, little man. That's our word." As the convoy peeled away, leaving Tommy in the center's care, Ethan felt the pull of unfinished roads. The PI's next message burned in his pocket. Leads on the father. Tangled in a web of evasion that reeked of bought silence. This wasn't over, it was just the first bend. The Brotherhood reformed, engines growling defiance against the gathering clouds, ready to chase justice through the shadows. Loyalty wasn't a choice. It was the spark that lit the dark, turning strangers into saviors, 1 mile at a time. The asphalt blurred beneath the tires as the convoy thundered onward, the midday sun now a relentless hammer beating down on the open plains. Dust devils swirled in the distance, faint whispers of chaos against the vast, unyielding sky. Ethan's grip tightened on the handlebars, the vibration traveling up his arms like a pulse, sinking with the unresolved knot in his chest. Leaving Tommy at Haven's Rest had felt right in the moment, a handoff to what passed for safety in a world of frayed edges. But the boy's parting glance, those eyes holding onto a fragile thread of trust, gnawed at him. The PI's latest text lingered in his mind. The father's trail led to a dusty border town, tangled in whispers of unpaid debts and shadow dealings that hinted at more than just a runaway parent. Ethan's jaw set. Promises like the one he'd made to Jake decades ago didn't dissolve at a fence line. They rode into the heat, the air thick with the scent of sun-baked sage and the faint metallic tang of overheating engines. Miles later, they veered off the main drag toward a roadside motel, its faded sign creaking in the breeze like a weary sigh. The iron promise needed a breather, maps spread, phones charged, and a chance to regroup. Ethan killed his engine first, the sudden quiet amplifying the distant call of a lone crow. The crew dismounted in a loose circle, boots crunching on gravel, leathers shedding the day's grit. Marcus lit a cigarette, the flame flickering briefly before the wind snuffed it, his eyes scanning the horizon. "That cop back there, something off about him. Too quick to wave us through, like he was glad to see the kid off our hands." Riley nodded, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her glove, her nurse's instincts still buzzing from the handover. Tommy clung like he knew it wasn't the end, and that place. Haven's Rest. Looked clean enough, but I've seen centers like it, overloaded, understaffed. What if the system's just shuffling him into another weight? Ethan pulled out his phone, the screen's glow harsh in the sunlight. Another message from the PI, a grizzled vet named Samuel who'd traded dog tags for detective work after the same war that scarred them all. Father's name, Lucas Grant. Last seen at a trucking depot 2 states over. Associates point to a loan shark ring, nothing flashy, but the kind that squeezes families dry. Mother's been dodging calls, scared. And get this, the custody alert? It got flagged and buried quick. Smells like someone pulled strings. Ethan's blood simmered, a slow boil born from memories of brass in uniforms who looked the other way while good men paid the price. He'd sworn off that rot when he founded the club, turning the pain into purpose, a vow etched in club ink to stand for the overlooked, to cut through the lies with the truth of action. "We ride to that depot at first dark," he said, voice low and steady, drawing nods from the circle. "No charging in blind. We watch, we listen, iron promise way, honor first." As the sun dipped toward the jagged hills, painting the sky in strokes of amber and crimson, the crew settled into the motel's sparse rooms. The air hummed with the low murmur of conversations. Tales swapped over lukewarm coffee from a dented pot, the clink of tools as someone tuned a bike in the lot. Ethan sat alone on the sagging porch, staring at the crumpled drawing Tommy had pressed into his hand before they parted. That simple sketch of a bike and 2 figures, now smudged but unbroken. It stirred the ghost of his own loss. The son he'd buried young, The wife who'd walked away, blaming the road for stealing their life. Redemption wasn't a destination, it was these moments. Choosing to step in when the world stepped back. A soft footfall pulled him from his thoughts, Riley carrying 2 steaming mugs. "You carrying that kid's hope like it's your own baggage," she said, settling beside him. Her eyes, sharp and kind, held the weight of her own scars. A marriage ended by a patient's final breath, pulling her to the club for the family it offered. "We all are," Ethan replied, accepting the coffee, its bitter warmth grounding him. "That's the vow." Dusk fell like a curtain, the convoy slipping into the twilight shadows, headlights off to blend with the gathering dark. The trucking depot loomed on the outskirts of a forgotten town, floodlights casting stark pools of yellow across chain-link fences and idling semis. The air reeked of diesel fumes and stale oil, the distant honk of horns a gritty symphony. They parked in a concealed thicket, engines silent, and fanned out on foot. Ghosts in leather, moving with the quiet precision of men who'd stalked worse than shadows. Marcus took point, his bulk surprisingly stealthy, while a younger rider, Jonathan, with fresh ink from his first club run, covered the rear. Ethan and Riley hung back, binoculars trained on the main office, where a lone figure paced under the awning. Lucas Grant, Tommy's father, his face haggard, illuminated by the glow of a cigarette. Through the lenses, Ethan watched the man argue into a phone, gestures sharp and desperate. Snatches of words carried on the wind. "Can't pay it all. Kid's better off without me. They said they'd handle the papers." A sleek black car pulled up, disgorging 2 suits who flanked Lucas like sentinels, their voices a low rumble. One flashed what looked like documents, official stamps, but the exchange felt wrong, a handoff laced with coercion. Ethan's pulse quickened. This wasn't abandonment born of neglect, but a web spun by those who preyed on the desperate, twisting laws into nooses. The PI's intel clicked, a corrupt network. Insiders at places like Haven's Rest, pocketing fees to resolve cases, shuffling kids into foster limbo, while parents vanished under pressure. Justice here wasn't blind. It was bought, leaving the vulnerable to the storm. A twig snapped nearby, Jonathan signaling trouble. Headlights swept the perimeter, a patrol vehicle circling lazily. The crew melted back, hearts pounding in unison, retreating to the bikes without a sound. Once clear, Ethan gathered them under the stars, the night's chill seeping through their jackets. "It's bigger than one man," he said, the conviction in his voice forging steel in the air. "Lucas is scared, trapped. And Tommy, he's collateral in their game." Marcus crushed out his smoke. "We expose it. Call in favors. Samuel's got contacts who owe us from the old days." Riley's face hardened with resolve. "For the kid, for all the ones like him." The engines whispered to life, carrying them back toward the motel. But the road had shifted. This detour had unearthed a betrayal that tested the club's core. Loyalty not just to their own, but to the promise of a world where the small weren't crushed. Ethan felt the drawing in his pocket, a quiet talisman against the gathering storm. Dawn would bring plans, alliances forged in the fire of truth. The Brotherhood rode on, bound by oaths that outlasted the miles, turning personal redemption into a force that could shatter chains. In the quiet hours, as the stars wheeled overhead, Ethan whispered to the wind. For Jake, for his lost son, for Tommy, they would ride until the shadows broke. The motel room's fluorescent hum cast jagged shadows across the scarred wooden table, where maps and scribbled notes lay like battle plans from a war no one wanted. Ethan paced the threadbare carpet, the creak of floorboards echoing his unrest, while the distant rumble of a passing truck vibrated through the thin walls. Outside, the night air hung heavy with the scent of cooling asphalt and distant rain, a reminder that storms never truly ended, they just reshaped themselves. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his broad chest. the faint glow of his phone screen illuminating the lines etched by years of standing sentinel. Riley sat nearby, her fingers drumming a quiet rhythm on a coffee mug. The steam long gone, but the warmth lingering like unresolved questions. Jonathan, the youngest of the core riders, hovered at the window, peering into the dark lot where their bikes stood like silent guardians, chrome dulled by dew. Samuel's voice crackled over the speakerphone, tinny but urgent, pulling them back from the edges of doubt. "I've got more on this web, Ethan. It's not just Lucas. It's a syndicate feeding off fractured families. Shady lawyers greasing palms at places like Haven's Rest, pushing kids into temporary holds while they negotiate with desperate parents. Debts get settled with silence, and the little ones, they get lost in the shuffle." The words landed like gravel under tires, each one grinding against the club's code. Ethan stopped pacing, his hands planting flat on the table, knuckles whitening. He'd seen this rot before, in the green zones overseas where officials bartered lives for favors, leaving soldiers to clean up the blood. The vow to Jake had been his anchor then. Protect the innocent no matter the cost. Now it pulled taut, threatening to snap under the weight of what Tommy represented, a child adrift in a system that preyed on vulnerability. "We hit them where it hurts," Ethan said, his voice a low rumble that filled the room. "Start with Lucas. If he's the key, we turn him without breaking him." Marcus nodded, exhaling a plume of smoke that curled toward the ceiling fan. Risky, man's cornered, could bolt or bite. But risk was the road's currency, and the iron promise had banked on worse odds. Riley's eyes met Ethan's, a silent understanding passing between them. She'd lost her brother to a similar tangle years back, a vet swallowed by debt and bad choices, his pleas ignored by the very badges meant to help. "Tommy's waiting," she said simply. "We owe him the truth, not another empty promise." Jonathan shifted, his youthful fire tempered by the night's revelations. "What about calling in the old crew? Noah's got ties to a clean judge up north, could blow this open." The plan took shape in the dim light, sketched in hurried lines on a napkin. Approach Lucas at dawn, offer protection in exchange for his story, then loop in Samuel's contacts to trace the money trail. No guns, no threats, just the weight of their word, backed by the Brotherhood's unyielding presence. As the clock ticked past midnight, the room grew quieter, the air thick with the unspoken burdens each carried. Ethan stepped outside for air, the porch steps groaning under his boots. The stars pierced the velvet sky, indifferent witnesses to human frailties. He pulled Tommy's drawing from his pocket, unfolding it carefully. The crayon lines bold despite the smudges, a testament to a boy's unscarred hope. It stirred the ache of his own past, the night his son had slipped away, small and silent in a hospital bed. While Ethan rode endless miles to outrun the grief, the club had saved him then, weaving his loss into a tapestry of purpose. Now this felt like paying it forward, one oath at a time. Back inside, the group dispersed to catch fragments of sleep, but Ethan lay awake on the sagging bed, the springs protesting his every shift. Dreams flickered at the edges, flashes of desert patrols. Jake's final grin fading into Tommy's rain-streaked face. Dawn crept in grey and unforgiving, painting the horizon in muted silvers. The convoy stirred early, engines coughing to life with a throaty growl that shattered the morning hush. They rolled out single file, the air crisp with the promise of dew-kissed fields and the faint earthy scent of awakening soil. The trucking depot came into view sooner than expected, its silhouette stark against the rising light, semis looming like behemoths in the fog. Ethan signaled a pull-off, the bikes idling low as they scanned for movement. Lucas's rig was there, parked crookedly near the fence, exhaust still warm from a recent run. They approached on foot, leather soles silent on the damp gravel, the depot's floodlights flickering like dying embers. Lucas emerged from the cab, bleary-eyed and rumpled, a thermos in hand that sloshed coffee onto the ground as he froze at the sight of them. "Who the hell?" he started, voice cracking, but Ethan raised a hand, palm out, his stance open yet commanding. "Lucas Grant, we know about the boy, Tommy, and the mess you're in." And the man's face drained of color, eyes darting like a cornered animal's. He backed against the truck, the metal clanging softly. "You cops? I ain't done nothing wrong, just trying to keep my head above water." Marcus flanked him gently while Riley hung back, her presence a quiet assurance. "Not cops," Ethan said. "Riders, the kind who keep promises. Your son's safe for now, but this game's bigger than you. Talk to us before it swallows him too." Words tumbled out then, hesitant at first, then in a rush. The mounting loans after a bad haul, the suits promising relief if he signed away custody temporarily, the threats veiled as advice from a crooked counselor at Haven's Rest. They said it'd sort itself, pay off the debt, get Tommy back clean. But now, I hear whispers of kids vanishing into the system. Ethan's gut twisted. It mirrored the PI's intel, a poetic injustice where the powerful twisted oaths into chains. Lucas's hands shook as he lit a cigarette, the flame trembling. "I left him waiting thinking it'd protect him. Stupid, all of it." Empathy warred with resolve in Ethan's chest. This wasn't a villain, just a man broken by the grind. Much like the vets he'd pulled from the brink. But as Lucas spoke, an engine revved nearby, too deliberate, headlights sweeping their way. The black car from the night before, circling back. "Time's up," Ethan murmured, clapping a hand on the man's shoulder. "Ride with us. We'll get your story straight. Expose the rot." Lucas hesitated, then nodded, climbing into the sidecar with a defeated slump. The convoy surged forward, engines roaring defiance as they outpaced the pursuers, the wind whipping secrets into the morning light. Back at the motel, Samuel confirmed. Recordings, documents, enough to crack the facade. Yet doubt lingered. Confronting corruption meant facing their own shadows, testing if the iron promise could bend without breaking. The road called again, pulling them toward Haven's Rest for answers, where loyalty would demand a stand against the tide. Ethan's heart steadied on the throttle, the vibration of vow renewed, for the lost, the waiting, the redeemed. They would ride until justice dawned. If this story is touching your heart, hit that like button to show your support. The highway unfurled like a silver vein under the midday sun, its heat rising in shimmering waves that distorted the horizon. The convoy cut through it with purposeful thunder, engines growling in harmony, the air alive with the sharp bite of exhaust and the faint, salty whisper of sweat-soaked leather. Ethan led at the front, his posture unyielding, the wind tugging at the edges of his vest, where club patches gleamed like badges of forgotten wars. Lucas rode in the sidecar beside Marcus's bike, his face a mask of hollowed cheeks and shadowed eyes, gripping the edge as if it were the last tether to his unraveling life. The man's confessions from the depot still echoed in Ethan's mind, fragments of desperation, of debts that snowballed into deals with devils in suits, all to shield a son he feared he'd already lost. Tommy's drawing burned in Ethan's pocket, a quiet reminder that this ride wasn't vengeance, it was reclamation, a promise carved from the raw stuff of regret. Behind them, the crew formed a rolling fortress, Riley scanning the rear view with her steady gaze, Jonathan weaving slightly to keep pace, his youthful energy tempered by the gravity of their cargo. The black car from the depot had peeled away after a tense chase, its taillights vanishing into a side road like a predator slinking to regroup. But shadows like that didn't fade, they multiplied, and Ethan knew the syndicate's reach extended further than dusty depots. Samuel's updates crackled over the encrypted line in Ethan's earpiece, painting a grim picture. Falsified reports at Haven's Rest, counselors on payroll, families coerced into silence with threats wrapped in legalese. "They're moving kids like commodities," Samuel said, his voice gravelly from too many late nights. "Tommy's file's been flagged for relocation. Could mean foster limbo or worse. Get there before they shuffle him." the miles blurred into a hypnotic rhythm, the landscape shifting from barren plains to the outskirts of the town, where Haven's Rest squatted like a false sanctuary. Chain-link fences bordered its perimeter, topped with barbed wire that glinted mockingly in the light, while the playground swings creaked empty in the breeze. As the convoy approached, slowing to a disciplined crawl, the air grew thicker, laced with the sterile tang of institutional bleach wafting from open windows. Ethan signaled a halt at the entrance, engines idling to a low purr that vibrated through the ground like a warning. Locals paused on sidewalks, curious glances turning to wary stares. Bikers weren't common here, and this many spelled trouble or salvation, depending on the eye. Dismounting with synchronized ease, the group moved as one toward the main doors, boots thudding on cracked pavement. Lucas hung back at first, his steps faltering, but Riley's firm hand on his arm steadied him. "This ends today," she murmured, her voice a thread of steel beneath the calm. Inside, the lobby hummed with fluorescent sterility, clipboards stacked on a desk, the distant murmur of voices behind closed doors. A receptionist looked up, her smile freezing at the influx of leather and resolve. "Can I help you?" she asked, fingers hovering near a phone. Ethan stepped forward, his presence filling the space without crowding it. "We're here for Tommy Grant, and a talk with whoever's running this place." The officer from the day before appeared then, emerging from a side hallway with a clipboard in hand, his badge catching the light like a false promise. Recognition flickered in his eyes, sharpening to suspicion. "You again?" "Handled the drop-off clean. Kids in processing, no need for a reunion tour." But Ethan's gaze held steady, reading the flicker of unease, the way the man's hand rested too casually on his radio. Lucas pushed forward, voice raw. "Processing? That's my boy you're shuffling like paperwork. I know what you people do, sign away rights, bury the truth for a cut." The words hung heavy, drawing stares from staff peeking from offices. The officer's face hardened, but before he could retort, a door swung open at the end of the hall. Out stepped a woman in a crisp blazer, her hair pulled tight, exuding the polished authority of someone who'd long ago traded empathy for efficiency. Director Hale, the nameplate read. She assessed the group with cool detachment, then gestured to a conference room. "Let's discuss this privately. No need for theatrics." The room was sparse, folding chairs around a laminate table, the air stale with the ghost of old coffee. As they settled, Ethan slid Tommy's drawing across the surface, its crayon innocence a stark contrast to the sterile surroundings. "We found the boy in the rain, alone because of broken deals. Your system's part of it. Coercing parents, vanishing kids into the cracks. Lucas here has proof, documents, names. We're not leaving until Tommy's safe and this rot's exposed." Hale's composure cracked slightly, her fingers tapping the table in a measured rhythm. Allegations like that require evidence, not vigilante rides. The center follows protocols, child welfare laws designed to protect. But her eyes darted to the officer, a silent exchange that reeked of complicity. Marcus leaned in, his voice a low rumble. "Protocols that line pockets? We've got a PI tracing the money, lawyers, sharks, all connected back here. One call, and it unravels." Tension coiled in the air, thick as the humidity pressing against the windows. Jonathan slipped out briefly, coordinating with Samuel on the line outside, ensuring backups were en route. Clean authorities, the kind who still honored oaths over payoffs. Lucas broke first, sliding a crumpled envelope across the table. Signed agreements. Timestamps matching his debts, hints of bribes veiled as donations. Hale's face paled, but she recovered with a thin smile. "This is a misunderstanding. Tommy's fine. Let's check on him." They followed her down a corridor lined with faded posters of happy families, the irony biting like gravel. In a small playroom, there he was, Tommy, perched on a beanbag, stacking blocks with mechanical focus, his small frame dwarfed by the room's emptiness. At the sight of Ethan, his face lit up, blocks tumbling as he scrambled over. "You came back. I knew you would." The hug was fierce, small arms wrapping around Ethan's leg, the boy's trust a balm against the storm. But joy fractured as Hale cleared her throat. "Visitations limited. If you're not family—" Riley cut in, her nurse's credentials flashing from her wallet. "We're his family now, and we're taking him out of this trap." The officer shifted, radio crackling with an incoming call, Samuel's doing no doubt, alerting the right ears. Hale's mask slipped fully then, whispers of negotiation turning to pleas for discretion. "This could ruin everything," she muttered, but Ethan shook his head. "It already has, for kids like him. Justice isn't selective." As papers were hastily gathered, emergency custody petitions, Lucas's testimony formalized, the room's tension eased into reluctant compliance. Tommy clung to Ethan's hand, the drawing now shared between father and son, a bridge mending frayed bonds. Outside, the convoy reformed under the watchful eye of arriving unmarked cars, clean investigators drawn by the club's quiet pull of favors from old war ties. The syndicate's web quivered, threads snapping one by one, but Ethan knew the fight lingered in the shadows. Lucas mounted up behind his son in the sidecar, the pair a fragile unit reborn. Engines roared to life, carrying them away from Haven's Rest, the sun dipping low and casting long, hopeful shadows. Redemption wasn't a single ride, it was the chain of choices, linking losses to legacies. The road stretched ahead, whispering of trials yet to come, but for now, the iron promise held true. Loyalty's engine, unyielding against the gathering dusk. The engine's roar faded into a steady hum as the convoy carved through the twilight, the sun's last embers bleeding into the horizon like spilled ink on canvas. Tommy nestled against Lucas in the sidecar, the boy's head resting on his father's shoulder, the crumpled drawing clutched between them, a fragile emblem of mended fractures. The air rushed past, cool and laced with the fading warmth of the day, carrying the faint, acrid echo of the depot's diesel and the sterile bite of Haven's Rest. Ethan rode point, his silhouette cutting the wind, the vibration of the throttle sinking with the pulse of unresolved tension thrumming in his veins. They'd cracked the surface of the syndicate's web, pulling Tommy from its grasp, but shadows lingered in the rear view, unmarked cars trailing at a distance, their headlights winking like distant predators. Samuel's voice had buzzed in his earpiece moments after the escape. "They're scrambling. Hale's already lawyering up, but the real heads are deeper. City hall ties, the kind that bury scandals under red tape." Lucas shifted in the sidecar, his grip tightening on Tommy, as if the boy might dissolve into the dusk. "I never meant for this," he murmured over the wind, voice raw against the engine's growl. "Thought signing those papers would buy time, pay off the sharks, get us straight, but they twisted it, made me the villain in my own kid's story." Ethan glanced back, his eyes meeting Lucas's in a brief, steel-hard exchange. The man wasn't redeemed yet. Trust was a road, not a checkpoint, and the iron promise demanded proof in miles, not words. Behind them, Marcus rode flank, his bulk a shield against the encroaching night, while Riley and Jonathan scanned the mirrors, their leathers whispering with each lean. The crew had swelled subtly. 2 old war buddies, Noah and David, joining from a side route after Samuel's alert, their bikes adding weight to the formation. Family chosen, oaths renewed, turning a rescue into a reckoning. They veered off the highway toward a secluded ranch house on the plain's edge, a safe haven owned by a club ally. A retired vet with acres of open land and a barn that swallowed bikes like secrets. The gravel crunched under tires as they pulled in, the air shifting to the earthy scent of hay and horse sweat, stars pricking the velvet sky overhead. Dismounting, Ethan killed his engine first, the sudden silence amplifying the night's chorus. Crickets chirping in rhythmic defiance, a distant owl's call slicing the quiet. Tommy hopped out, legs steady now, his small hand finding Lucas's without hesitation. "This place feels like the drawing," the boy said, eyes tracing the silhouette of a weathered barn against the moonrise. Ethan knelt, ruffling the kid's hair, the gesture carrying the weight of unspoken losses, his own son's laughter silenced too soon. "It's a start, little man. Real adventures begin with solid ground." Inside the ranch house, lamplight spilled warm across knotty pine walls, casting flickering shadows that danced like ghosts of old rides. The crew gathered around a scarred oak table, maps unrolled beside steaming pots of chili that filled the air with savory spice and the comforting sizzle of cornbread in the oven. Samuel joined via video link, his face grainy on a borrowed laptop, lines deepened by the screen's glow. "Hail's spilling to save her skin," names a councilman, Harlan Voss, who's the puppet master. "Pulls strings from City Hall," funnels desperate families into the system for kickbacks. Tommy was just one thread, dozens more like him, shuffled to facilities that aren't facilities at all. Lucas's face crumpled, spoon pausing midway to his mouth. "Voss? I dealt with his goons. Said they'd handle the debts if I stayed quiet, threatened to take Tommy permanent if I fought." The room tensed, forks clinking like judgments. The moral weight settling heavy as the club's charter lay open nearby, its pages worn from vows, etched in blood and ink. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the table, the wood cool under his forearms. "We don't charge blind. Voss is insulated, badges, lawyers, the works. But we've got Lucas's docs, Hale's testimony pending, and Samuel's traces on the money. One push, and it topples." Marcus nodded. His voice, a gravelly anchor. "Call in the judge, Noah's contact, clean warrant, expose it daylight." But doubt flickered in Riley's eyes as she watched Tommy play with a deck of cards by the fire, his laughter a rare spark in the dim. "What if they come for him here? The system's corrupt, but it's got teeth, could spin us as kidnappers, twist our help into threat." Jonathan, ever the firebrand, slammed a fist lightly on the table. "Then we stand. Iron Promise isn't about hiding. It's about the stand that honors the forgotten." The debate stretched into the small hours, the ranch's clock ticking like a heartbeat, while outside, wind rustled the cottonwoods, carrying the faint whine of engines on the distant road. Ethan stepped onto the porch for air, the night enveloping him in its chill embrace, stars wheeling overhead like silent witnesses. He pulled out a worn photo from his wallet, Jake, grinning in fatigues, arms slung around a younger Ethan under a foreign sun. "Watch the little ones," Jake had gasped, blood staining the sand. That vow had birthed the club, turned personal grief into collective steel. Now it extended to Lucas and Tommy, a father and son clawing back from the abyss. Redemption demanded sacrifice, and Ethan felt the pull. Confronting Voss meant risking the brotherhood, drawing lines in a war of whispers and warrants. A low rumble shattered the quiet. Headlights piercing the tree line, not the convoy's allies, but sleek sedans gliding like sharks. The crew mobilized in seconds, boots thudding, shadows merging with the night. Ethan signaled retreat to the barn. Tommy scooped up by Riley, his small form trembling but silent. Lucas froze, then moved, grabbing a shotgun from the wall, not to fire, but as a symbol of resolve. "They won't take him again," he whispered, voice hardening into something unbreakable. The sedans halted at the gate, doors opening to disgorge suits and a familiar face. The officer from Haven's Rest, flanked by Voss's men, their silhouettes sharp against the moon. "Stand down," the officer called, megaphone amplifying the false authority. "Warrant for the child. Interference is obstruction." Ethan emerged from the barn's shadow, hands visible, the crew fanning out behind him, a wall of leather and loyalty. Warrants as crooked as your boss. We know about Voss, the bribes, the shuffles. Step back, or this ends with truths you can't bury. Tension crackled like static, the air thick with the standoff's electric hush, wind whipping dust into eddies at their feet. Tommy peeked from Riley's arms, his eyes locking on Ethan's, a silent plea that sealed the vow. The officer hesitated, radio crackling with urgent chatter. Samuel's work, no doubt, feeding interference to the right channels. Headlights approached from the opposite direction. Clean squad cars, lights flashing blue redemption. Voss's men faltered, retreating to their vehicles as the tide turned, engines revving in frustrated defeat. The ranch exhaled, the crew standing firm until the threats dissolved into taillights fading down the drive. Inside, Tommy hugged Lucas tight, the boy's whisper cutting the relief. "You came back, Dad," like they promised. Ethan watched, the weight lifting fractionally. But the road to full justice twisted ahead, Voss cornered but not broken, alliances tested, secrets yet to surface. The iron promise rode on, engines cooling in the night, bound by oaths that turned darkness to dawn, one unyielding mile at a time. The first light of dawn crept over the ranch like a hesitant promise, painting the cottonwoods in soft golds and the dew-kissed grass in shimmering veils. The air hung crisp, laced with the earthy musk of turned soil and the faint, lingering bite of last night's tension. Exhaust fumes from fleeing sedans, the sharp tang of fierce sweat on leather. Ethan stood on the porch, coffee mug steaming in his calloused hands, the warmth seeping into his palms as he watched the horizon. The standoff had ebbed with the arrival of the clean squad cars, their lights now dimmed, officers milling about the drive like guardians finally roused. Voss's men had scattered into the night, but the echo of their retreat thrummed in Ethan's chest, a temporary victory, the kind that demanded follow-through to become legend. Inside, the ranch house stirred with quiet purpose. Tommy sat cross-legged on the worn rug by the fireplace, embers glowing faintly, his small fingers tracing the lines of the drawing now smoothed and shared. Lucas knelt beside him, voice low and steady, weaving words of apology into the morning light filtering through lace curtains. "I was lost out there, son. But these folks, they showed me the way back." The boy's nod was solemn, eyes bright with a trust rebuilt brick by crayon-marked brick. Riley moved about the kitchen, the clink of mugs and the sizzle of eggs on the stove grounding the moment in domestic rhythm, her nurse's hands steady despite the shadows under her eyes. Marcus and Jonathan conferred in murmurs by the window, phones buzzing with updates from Samuel. Voss holed up in City Hall, lawyers circling like vultures, but the evidence, Lucas's documents, Hale's recorded confessions, had ignited a fire the corrupt couldn't douse. Ethan stepped back inside, the screen door creaking softly, drawing all eyes. Samuel's got the judge on board. Warrants are rolling out as we speak. City Hall, the depot, every thread in this web. His voice carried the gravel of roads travelled, the weight of oaths upheld. Lucas rose, meeting Ethan's gaze. A flicker of the man he could become shining through the weariness. "I owe you more than words, for pulling me out, for giving us this shot." Ethan clapped a hand on his shoulder, the gesture firm, bridging the gap between stranger and kin. "Always not the word. Iron promise, we pay forward. Jake taught me that, back when the world tried to break us all." The name hung like smoke, invoking the vow that bound them, turning personal scars into collective armor. The crew gathered around the table as breakfast plates emptied, the air rich with the savory comfort of eggs and fresh-baked bread, steam curling like unspoken hopes. Noah and David, the war-tide reinforcements, joined the circle, their faces etched with the same quiet resolve that had pulled them from distant roots. "Voss's network crumbles," Noah said, sliding a tablet across the wood. Digital trails of laundered funds, witness statements from families like Lucas's, all converging on the councilman's office. One raid, And the dominoes fall. Kids like Tommy get real homes, not shadows. Tommy looked up from his plate, syrup smudged on his chin, his voice piping clear. "Does that mean no more waiting in the rain?" The room stilled, the question piercing like a clear desert sky. Riley ruffled his hair, her smile soft. "No more, kid, not on our watch." By mid-morning, the ranch buzzed with arriving allies, uniformed figures in crisp lines, their badges glinting true under the climbing sun. The clean investigators coordinated with Samuel's feeds, piecing the puzzle, bribes funneled through Haven's Rest, debts weaponized to strip rights, children bartered like cargo in a cynical trade. Ethan watched from the porch as Lucas signed final affidavits, his hand steady now, the tremor of fear replaced by purpose. Tommy played nearby, chasing a stray dog through the grass, laughter ringing like bells against the fading night. This was redemption's quiet face. Not thunderous clashes, but the slow mend of broken bonds, justice blooming from seeds of loyalty. Word came swift. Voss in cuffs, his empire fracturing under spotlights and subpoenas. Hale faced charges, the center's doors shuttered pending overhaul, its hidden ledgers exposed to sunlight. Families scattered by the web began to reconnect, whispers turning to reunions. Ethan felt the knot in his chest loosen, the road's endless pull yielding to a rare stillness. But stillness wasn't idleness. It was the pause before the next vow. As the officials departed, gravel crunching under tires, the convoy reformed in the drive, bikes gleaming, engines purring low like contented beasts. Lucas approached Ethan last, Tommy at his side. A duffel of belongings slung over his shoulder. "We're heading to my sister's up north. Clean start, no debts hanging." The boy hugged Ethan's leg fiercely, then pulled back with a grin. "Will you ride with us sometime, like in the drawing?" Ethan's throat tightened, the echo of his lost son flickering in the words. "Count on it, little man. Iron promise always comes through." Hugs and handshakes rippled through the crew. Marcus's bear-like embrace, Riley's knowing nod, Jonathan's fist bump, laced with promise. Lucas mounted a borrowed bike, Tommy in a secure seat behind, the pair a unit forged anew. The engines thundered alive, a symphony of steel and soul, kicking up dust devils that swirled like celebrations. They rode out together for the first miles, the highway unfurling under tires that hummed with finality. Plains stretched wide, hawks wheeling overhead in lazy arcs, the wind carrying the clean scent of open sky and possibility. At a crossroads, the paths diverged, Lucas and Tommy veering north toward healing, the iron promise continuing west, toward whatever forgotten soul called next. Ethan glanced back once, the sidecar's small figure waving, a silhouette against the sun. Promises survived, he thought, not in ink or oaths alone, but in the lives they touched, the families chosen in the rain's aftermath. Miles later, the crew pulled over at a scenic overlook, the valley below a tapestry of green and gold, rivers snaking like silver veins. They dismounted, sharing waterskins and stories, the bond tighter for the trial. Ethan unfolded Jake's photo, holding it to the light, the grin eternal. "For the little ones," he murmured, and the others echoed, voices blending with the wind. The road called onward, infinite and unforgiving, but they rode as one, guardians of the vulnerable, bearers of honor in a cynical world. Redemption wasn't an end. It was the fuel that kept the engines turning shadows to dawn, one heartfelt mile at a time. In the quiet that followed, as the sun crested high, Ethan felt the legacy settle. A father's return, a boy's hope restored, a syndicate shattered by loyalty's unyielding force. The iron promise endured, a family woven from losses and loves ready for the next storm. And in that enduring, they found their truest ride home.